In this video, I'm going to walk you through the process of deploying a Laravel app for the first time. It's common to see tutorials where everything goes right the first time you deploy, so instead of doing that in this video, I'm going to take a simple Laravel app that I've built and I'm going to deploy it and show you all the common issues that you'll run into when you go to deploy your app for the first time. What I'm going to talk about in this video works for any method of deployment that you choose, but for this video, I'm going to deploy to a service called Sevalla, which is the sponsor of this video. Sevalla is one of the easiest deployment services I've used. It auto-detects which language and framework you're using, and it has great defaults, so the deployment process is smooth for any type of app you want to deploy. For most apps, all you need to do is click through a few screens to get a deployed app. You'll save a ton of time during the deployment process compared to spinning up your own server to deploy. In addition to deploying apps, you can also create databases, object stores, and static sites, so you'll have anything you need to deploy a modern app. So if you're interested in giving Sevalla a try, you can click on the link in the description below, create an account, and then deploy your app in a few minutes. Okay, so now let's get into the common Laravel problems you can experience when deploying an app for the first time. So to begin, let me show you what I have already. I have this basic to-do app. I can put in a to-do item here. So record YouTube video. I can add this to the list. And then I can add another one, edit YouTube video, and added. I can click on one and it will cross it out. I can click on delete completed and I can click on delete all. So a very basic to-do app that I'm running here. So these are the routes that I have just to show you how simple the app is. But the important part is, how do we deploy this? So a good first step is to make sure you have your code in a Git repo and on some Git hosts like GitHub. So pretty much any method that you use to deploy an app is going to use Git somewhere. So let's go ahead and set that up. I'm going to create a new repository in my account called Laravel to-do, and then I'll just make this private and I'll create the repository. So down here, I'll copy the git remote add origin because I'll need to paste that in here soon. So what I'll do is I'll stop my npm server and then I will initialize the git repo. So git init. And then all I need to do is paste in the line that I copied from GitHub. And then I want to commit everything. So git add dots and git commit -m. And then I'll call this the first commit, right? So this is a good first step. And then I can do git push origin master to get it over to GitHub. So now let me just sign in my other window, authorize, and then I'll type in my two-factor code. Okay, so we see that my auth has succeeded. So I'll go back and it was able to push to GitHub. So let me close this and refresh. And we see all my code is on GitHub. So let me go back and I have a git ignore. So all these files aren't included, the most important being the env. So none of that is included. And also my database is not included. So we're going to have to handle that when we deploy. So now that I have my code in a Git repo, I can start some kind of deployment process. And like I said, I'm going to use Sevalla for this process. So let's go over to Sevalla and I will create a new application and I'll just click add application here. And my Sevalla account is already connected to my GitHub account. So all I have to do is search for the repository. So Laravel to-do. And then I want to click on this automatic deployment on commit. So every time I make a change, Sevalla will automatically deploy. And then the rest of this information here is just a name, a location. So keep the location in mind for when we create a database. Resources, I'll just click on the hobby one, and then I'll click create here. So this will go ahead and create the application for me in Sevalla. And of course, if you're deploying to another place, something similar will happen. You basically set everything up. It's going to give you a URL. So like if I click on visit app, this is where my to-do app will live. Although I haven't finished the deployment process yet because I haven't clicked on this deploy now button. So because I said I'm going to go through this process by showing you what can go wrong instead of when everything goes right, I'm just going to click deploy. So this won't work, but we'll debug each thing step by step. So if you are going through the same process, you know what to fix. So I'll wait for this to deploy and I'll come back when it's ready. Okay, so the deployment is done. It claims that it's running. So I'll go here and just refresh and we'll see what happens when I refresh. So we get this server error 500. So what's going on? Well, this can be one of many things. So let's handle each error one by one. So what I want to do is I'll start by looking at what happened with the deployment. So I'll look at the deployment log and see if there is an error that showed up in the deployment log. So let's take a look. I'm looking through all the commands that were run as it was deploying. And if an error happened while it was deploying, it will show it here. So far, it looks like everything is okay here. So just going through, and we don't see any errors. So we see this error, but we don't see an exact error message. So in this case, what I would recommend is setting up your environment variables. So here on Sevalla, you can go over to the left and click on environment variables, and then add environment variables. And they give you the option of adding environment variables one by one. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this env file that I have already and just put it on Sevalla. So let's go over here and I'll click import env, and then I'll select the env file. And then it's going to put in all of the configuration values. So for this example app, I actually don't need all of these, but I'll leave them in and I'll just change the ones that I need. So a good first one that I would try is changing local to production when it comes to the app env. So when you're deploying to production, this app env variable needs to be set to production, whereas when you are working in your local environment, it can be set to local. So let me change that, and then I will redeploy. So deploy changes here. And then with the extra environment variables and putting the app environment in production, let's take a look at what happens when the deployment completes. And what we can do is we can open up the deployment logs now so we can see if anything pops up while we're waiting. Okay, so the deployment is complete and we get all these warnings talking about the app referencing particular environment variables, but they're not set. So this is actually good because this gives us more information. So this is basically telling us that we have a bunch of values that we haven't set. But like I said, for the purposes of this video, we don't need to set all of them. So I won't. I'll just set the ones that are really important. So now that the app is running, let's try reloading the page and we should get another error. So let's see what that is. Okay, so good. So now instead of just seeing that plain server error page with no information, now we have a message that we can understand. And the basic message is database file at path doesn't exist. So why would this happen? Well, in my local environment, I created my app and my database was SQLite. But now that I've deployed to production, it's a good idea to consider a database that is hosted on a server. So for that, I'm going to use Postgres, but you can also use MySQL as well. So let's start by going over to the environment variables again, and let's just take a look at some of the keys that are available for the database. So if I scroll down, I will find DB connection. So if we show this, we see it's SQLite. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to change this to Postgres. And what I can do is instead of SQLite, I can edit this variable to be PGSQL. So that is what I need the database connection to be for Postgres. So I'll save that. And now I need to think about setting up a database. So on Sevalla, it's really easy to set up a database. So I'll go back to the main dashboard, click on databases here and create a database. And I said Postgres, but you have other databases available. And I think the default values are fine for my case. So the only thing that's important here on Sevalla is the location of the database needs to be in the same data center as your app. So I put my app in Las Vegas, so my database is also going to be in Las Vegas. So I'll create here. And now what I want to do is I want to go back to my application. And on Sevalla, what I can do is I can add a connection. So by adding a connection, it will automatically populate some environment variables for me. So I'll select the service. And the name of the Postgres database that was given to me is this Artistic Rose Earthworm. And then I'll just toggle this for add environment variables to the application. And these are the standard ones. So as soon as I set my database connection to PGSQL, it's going to start looking for these values. So if I have these in my environment variables, it will be able to pick them up. So I'll just add all of these. I'll click add connection here. And then now that my database is connected and I've updated the database connection in the environment variables, I'll try deploying the changes again. So I'll wait for this and then I'll come back once it is deployed and ready to test again. Okay, so the app has deployed again. And what I'll do is I'll refresh the page now to see if I get a different error. So refresh. Okay, so now I'm no longer getting the unknown database error, but now I'm getting relation sessions does not exist. So that means it can't find the sessions table in the database. So why would that be the case? So the reason why is because I haven't actually migrated everything to the Postgres database. So I have to run the migration. So how can I run the migration? So there are multiple ways of doing this, but the idea is I need to run the command php artisan migrate. But because I'm deploying, I want this to run automatically at the end of the deployment process. So let me go over to my code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file called nixpacks.toml. So this is specific to Sevalla and any other service that uses nixpacks, but the idea can apply to any approach that you're taking. So in this nixpacks, you want to start by setting phases.postbuild. So everything under here will run after the app is done building. So I want to run some commands, and you just pass in a list of commands that you want to run. So I want to run php artisan migrate. And if I were running this on the command line myself, then this would be fine because it's going to give me a prompt asking me if I really want to migrate in production. But because I'm deploying this to a service where I'm not in control of what happens in the middle of the process, I need to pass -- force. So what -- force will do is it will make sure that it doesn't prompt the user. It will just run the migration. And then under here, I can say depends on, and I'll just do build. So there's another step in here called build. So I just want to make sure that this runs after build. So this is not strictly necessary, but just to make it more clear. So like I said, depending on the service that you're using, you might not have a nixpack, but on Sevalla, you can use nixpacks to define what happens after the build. So what I want to do is php artisan migrate force. So what I'll do is I'll commit everything. So just git add all and git commit added nixpack. And I'll just push to my repo. And just know in this command, another thing you can do is you can do php artisan optimize if you like. You can also do optimize : clear before this. Any commands that you want to run, this is the area where you would put them. And if you're deploying on a service where they have other places where you can define this, you just have to find the place where you can define the commands that run after the build has happened. And if you're deploying to your own server, then just make sure in your process that you're running artisan migrate force after everything has been built. So now let's go back over to Sevalla. And the deployment is in process because I push. So because I check that automatically deploy on commit, it is just deploying for me. So I'll wait for it to finish and then I'll check what happens next. All right, so we see it's been deployed successfully. And if we look back in the log, we should be able to see the migrate run somewhere. So let me just find it. So here we see the php artisan migrate force, and then it's running these 4 migrations. So 3 came with Laravel and 1 I created myself for the to-do table. So now let's go back to the app and refresh and let's take a look. Okay, so now I have a new error. So it was able to get past the database error, but now it's saying that it can't find the file in the Vite manifest. So I added this custom file for the CSS for my project, and I'm using Vite to display it, but it's not in the manifest. So let me go back over to the code, and then I can go to Vite config down here. And then we see here in this input, I just need to add that file. So it's in my resources directory, and then CSS, BS, CSS, and flatly min. So resources /CSS /BS /CSS /flatly.min.css. So I'll go ahead and save that and I'll commit it. So I'll say added CSS file and I'll just go ahead and push. So I'll push it back. Then if we go over to Sevalla, it's going to automatically start deploying again because I just pushed something. So let's wait for this deployment and then we can see what happens when it's done. Okay, so it's been deployed again and let's take a look again. So let's refresh here and let's see what happens. Okay, perfect. So we see that the app looks to be working now, but the styles aren't correct. Okay, so what's happening here? So what I'll do is I'll open up my console and we see I have this error here. So block loading mix active content, right? So if I click on this link, This is the CSS that I put in my project. But if you look closely here, it's using HTTP instead of HTTPS. So you can't have resources that are hosted on something with HTTP on an HTTPS site. So what I'll do is I'll go over to Sevalla and then I'll update an environment variable to support this. So I'll add an environment variable, and that environment variable is going to be HTTPS, and the value of it is simply on. And another thing I want to do is I want to make sure that my app URL is consistent. So this todo.test comes from my dev environment. What I want to do is I want to update this to be the URL that I have here. So I'll just copy paste it in so we see the HTTPS in here. So app URL has been updated. I'll remove the trailing slash, click save, and then I'll deploy the changes again. So I'll click on the deployment and I'll wait for the deployment to finish. Okay, so my app has been deployed again, and let's refresh here. And now we see the styles are loading. So the last thing I need to do is check to make sure the app is actually working. So I'll put in a to-do, record a YouTube video here. I'll click add, and it adds it to the list, and I can mark it off. And we see the app is working correctly. So the last thing you want to do in your deployment process is make sure that your app is set to app debug false. Debug true is useful for the first deployment to make sure everything is working properly. But once you get everything set up, you want to put app debug to false so other people can't see your error messages when something happens. That should be only for you. And like I said, there are a bunch of environment variables here that we don't need. So just make sure you remove the ones that you don't need. I just added all of them from my env file. Another thing you may want to consider is generating a new app key. I just took the app key from my dev environment, and that's basically it. So with that, I hope I was able to demonstrate what you need to do to get through a lot of the common errors that you run into when you deploy your Laravel app. And if you do deploy on Sevalla, just know that they have a lot of useful information for you. So if you need to see the logs, so you know what's going on in your app, there's a log place here. There are analytics over here. You can create a disk to persist certain data like static files that your user uploads if you have that in your app. There's the networking configuration. There's a web terminal so you can go in and run artisan commands yourself if you need to. And there are the main settings for the app, amongst other things. And another thing you may want to consider is creating a Redis database so you can use the Redis database as your cache. And you would just update the environment variables to point to that Redis database. And you can find the Redis hosts and password and port here in the environment variables as well. So I hope that was enough to get you through deploying your first Laravel app. Let me know if you have any questions down below, and I'll try to help you deploy your app to whatever service you choose.